city at the heart of a public health crisis in China is shutting its public transport network to try to prevent the spread of a virus that's already infected hundreds of people.
With the coronavirus, the worst is yet to come.
32 more coronavirus cases.
More than 360 people in China have now died from the virus.
Per steel, rubber, cotton, all of those down by 6, 7, 8%.
Spread of the coronavirus is accelerating.
Coronavirus.
The world is on the verge of a crisis. A new virus is spreading faster than we can keep up with. You've likely heard of the coronavirus outbreak in Wuhan, as it has been the centre of a media shitstorm this last month. In the beginning, many thought that this was just another epidemic that the media had jumped on, but now the virus has spread to dozens of different nations, with 100,000 people infected worldwide, and already the death toll is in the thousands. We've known that a virus like this has been coming for years, and yet we are still unprepared, and now people and governments are finally starting to panic. But what is the coronavirus? What does it do to you, and how does it differ from diseases we've seen before? And most importantly, should we be worried? Disease has always been a problem for humanity. As we've progressed, we've managed to all but eliminate some of the major threats to survival our ancestors once faced. But with disease, we always seem to be a step behind. About 5 previously unknown diseases emerge every year, and it's impossible to tell what or how deadly the next one will be. Microbes are the tiny villains that cause disease. Most of them cannot replicate by themselves, so need to use other living cells to make their own copies. Our bodies are built to fight this. Your immune system, i.e. the big medical database inside your body, will trigger a response as it notices a disease taking hold, and it will create antibodies. However, this doesn't always work. Some diseases are caused by organisms that are too complex and overwhelming for us to beat by ourselves. Many of these types of aggressive illnesses are easily transferred between people, and with advancements in technology interconnecting every part of the modern world, diseases can spread much faster than we can keep up with. The main types of microbes that cause such illnesses are bacteria and viruses. Bacterial infections have killed millions throughout history, but for those we can take antibiotics, medicine which can kill the bacteria before it causes a problem. And since then, the world's population has spiked as diseases which once plagued our existence were wiped out. But a virus is something different. It changes its shape and evolves from host to host, being extremely well suited and adapted for this kind of transmission. And unfortunately, they can't be killed by antibiotics either. When a new virus emerges, it can evolve and adapt very quickly as it passes between infectees, making it much harder to catch. And when a disease spreads across the world and beyond our control in this manner, it is classified as a pandemic, a global illness that kills swathes of victims across a myriad of different countries. Humanity is no stranger to pandemics. In the last 20 years we've had bird flu, a flu humans got from birds, swine flu, which came from pigs, and 2013 saw a terrible outbreak of the highly lethal Ebola virus in West Africa. But the one that really lingers in the mind is severe acute respiratory syndrome, or SARS. In November 2002, a man in China fell ill after eating a meal containing meat from cats and snakes. The man displayed pneumonia-like symptoms, but typical treatments for pneumonia were ineffective, and his new illness passed on to the doctors and other patients in the hospital. This was a new virus, and it soon found its way into Hong Kong, where it spread like wildfire. The World Health Organization, or WHO, declared an emergency and named the disease, but the situation was already out of control. SARS' mortality rate was about 10%, which equated to a body count of about 800 people across a number of countries. SARS causes respiratory and lung complications, much like the coronavirus does. And the good news is that the coronavirus disease is significantly less lethal than SARS. On the other hand, the coronavirus is spreading much faster. While its mortality rate is only estimated to be about 2% compared to SARS' 10%, the coronavirus has already killed over 4,000 people, much more significant than its predecessor. This new disease is classified as COVID-19, the coronavirus disease of 2019. Coronavirus underpins a family of viruses that cause lung and respiratory complications like SARS does. Before this, no less than 4 coronaviruses already existed and circulated in humans. These same viruses can cause the common cold. This is why you may have heard of it compared to seasonal influenza, but COVID-19 is slightly different. It initially causes mild flu-like symptoms, but if left untreated can lead to more aggressive SARS-like symptoms and can be lethal in a small number of cases. The viruses look something like this, a body with little arm-like spikes coming off of it. The spikes on this strain of the coronavirus are shaped in such a way that the virus is good at latching onto the cells in our lungs. It can't reproduce by itself, but our cells can, and so it overrides the creation mechanisms within the cell to get it to start producing copies of the virus, instead of copies of the cell. With your cell factories hijacked, the virus starts to grow within you. Your body feels cells dying and triggers an immune response, but this might not occur for up to 14 days, and during this time, known as the incubation period, the virus is still capable of infecting other humans, meaning people who appear perfectly healthy could be contaminated. Furthermore, a new study in Germany has suggested that sufferers are most infectious to other people during this invisible stage, meaning the true extent of the virus across the world right now might be worse than we think. Once the effects do start to set in, sufferers begin with 3 initial mild symptoms. The first 2 are a fever or high temperature and a cough, and then, after a little while, a shortness of breath. This is because the virus is using your lung cells to produce more copies of itself, and so our lungs haven't got access to the resources they need, impairing the transfer of oxygen into our blood. Less oxygen means less breath and fewer cells for our lungs, which can lead to more serious symptoms, such as organ failure and death. Our bodies have never seen this virus before, so it takes your immune system a while to work out what to do with it. In most cases, it will eventually manufacture antibodies that can latch onto the virus and neutralize it. The symptoms will ease as the invaders die and you'll return to full health. However, not everyone has such luck. For people over 60 in particular, their immune systems are much weaker and cannot stop the virus as it overwhelms the lungs, causing more lethal symptoms. It can also lead to more serious complications if the sufferer has pre-existing health conditions, like lung disease, cancer or diabetes. And, with an immune system overstretched and distracted by coronavirus, sufferers are also susceptible to more serious illnesses like pneumonia. Because the virus needs to get into the lungs, it only has 2 ways into the body, either by being inhaled or by a person touching a contaminated surface and then touching their mouths. When SARS was spreading, the virus could survive and remain airborne, which has got many worrying about airborne transmission, but the coronavirus cannot survive in the air like SARS did. It is transferred via droplets that are projected into the air. So unless you are directly in range of a sneeze or a cough from a sufferer, your chance of inhaling the virus is relatively low. Catching coughs and sneezes in clean tissues and regularly using antibacterial soap are also 2 effective means of both preventing the disease and stopping its spread to others. It's not actually that hard to keep yourself protected. The problem, for the time being at least, is that there is little we can do about it once you do have it. For now, there is no direct treatment for it. The best we can do is put the particularly sick on life support and feeding tubes. So it's not a great outlook, but with that said, around 4 out of every 5 cases are said to be mild, and the mortality rate is comparatively lower than other epidemics and pandemics in the last 20 years. Many of these pandemics begin in animals. At any time, there may be as many as 1.5 million undiscovered viruses that exist in animals, which, if crossed over into humanity, could cause pandemics. When a virus crosses from species to species, and ultimately into humans, it changes rapidly and its new features can help it evade immune responses, making it much more dangerous. We call these hybrid organisms zoonotic viruses. That's what the coronavirus is. Most of these viruses can't jump directly into humans from their origin species, but they can jump into other animals and merge with similar viruses that can jump into humans. That's what we think happened in this fish market in the city of Wuhan, the capital of the Hubei province of China. Live animal markets like this exist right across the country, and animals are killed on site, meaning their blood is mixing and their viruses are being shared. The coronavirus likely infected its first patient in mid-November of last year and has been spreading ever since. The city of Wuhan is a megacity with 11 million people, more than the city of London. Over 20 million passengers pass through its airport every year, which runs flights to all major cities and hubs around the world. Furthermore, this virus began at a time of significant human migration in China. Millions had already left for the Chinese Lunar New Year, where some 3 billion internal trips are estimated to have taken place over just 40 days. And with the revelation that this virus is contagious during its incubation stage, one can only guess at how far it has travelled within the most populated country on Earth. The virus may have been spreading for weeks before we noticed it, but the story of the fight back begins with this man, Dr. Lee Wen Liang, a doctor at a hospital in Wuhan. Towards the end of 2019, he noticed 7 cases of a disease he thought looked like Sars. Lee posted about the condition in a group chat containing other doctors, and by December the 31st, Wuhan's Health Commission had reported to the WHO that it had recorded 27 cases of pneumonia from an unknown cause. But even after the virus had been noted, officials in Wuhan seemed less than willing to acknowledge the problem, and Lee was summoned by the local police and accused of making false statements and spreading rumours, an offence in China that can carry a 5-year jail sentence. Authorities then forced Lee to sign an agreement, swearing him to silence with the threat of being, quote, brought to justice if he continued to inform other people about the disease. And the attempted cover-up at this doctor's expense didn't end there. Dr. Lee had contracted the coronavirus while treating his first patients, and on the 6th of February he passed away. And now, anonymous sources in Wuhan have accused government officials of ordering Dr. Lee's deceased body to be put back on life support and attempting to change the reports of his status from dead to in a critical condition. Far from the respect and gratitude we owe Dr. Lee. No matter where you stand on the virus's severity, it is undeniable that Lee's actions were nothing short of heroic, and the situation could have been much, much worse if he hadn't have spoken up. In any case, an outbreak of this scale would have been hard to cover up. While all of this took place, COVID-19 was already tearing through China. On the 20th of January, officials stated that the virus was spreading from person to person, and that medical officials in Wuhan had fallen sick. As the situation began to spiral out of control, medical personnel were made to wear full body suits and quarantines were introduced. The government then deployed a further 50,000 medical officials to the Hubei province, as President Xi Jinping warned that the country was facing a grave situation, and since then their response has been unprecedented. A new 1,000 patient capacity hospital was constructed in the city within 9 days, as well as another similarly sized hospital shortly after. China gradually introduced more aggressive measures both inside and outside of the city, including locking down Wuhan's entire public transport system, and the megacity now resembles a ghost town. But the early measures were no use, because by January the 31st, a confirmed case in Tibet meant that COVID-19 was now present in every region of China, and it was also spreading in other countries. The virus had also begun on the back of a slowdown in the Chinese economy, and the fear and uncertainty of the virus meant that over $400 billion was wiped off of the value of its leading companies after the Chinese New Year extended holiday, and its shares have seen their biggest fall in 4 years. As the virus began to seem uncontrollable, Mongolia closed its 6,000 kilometre border with China, and Russia closed its 4,000 kilometre eastern border also. It's certainly been a heavy hit to take for China, but in recent days the aggressive measures undertaken seem to have begun paying off. The rate of new infections in China is slowing dramatically, and one of the new makeshift hospitals has now closed after discharging its last patient, and China has recorded its lowest number of new daily cases since January in the last few days, and no new reported cases outside of the Hubei province. But the problem is no longer in China, as the disease is now more prominent outside of the country. On the 4th of February, the first death outside of China was reported in the Philippines, as the World Health Organization was called to lay out a plan of action. The next country to face an uncontrolled outbreak was South Korea, with an explosion of infections in the city of Daegu last month. Since then, the country has faced over 7,000 cases, and the military has been mobilized to disinfect the city. The measures are equally as extensive in the nation due to host the biggest sporting event on Earth in just under 5 months. Japan has faced its own outbreak, with the Diamond Princess cruise ship being docked at Yokohama after 10 passengers aboard tested positive for the virus, and there have now been over 600 cases of the disease on the 3,000 passenger capacity cruise ship. The Japanese government is now one of a number of countries taking more radical measures. All schools across the country have been closed for several weeks, and doubt is growing over their capacity to host the Olympic Games in July. The virus has arrived in Europe in a big way too. The worst affected nation has been Italy by far. Starting a couple of weeks ago, around 50,000 people across 11 lockdown areas were forced to stay in their homes or face fines and jail sentences, with many public events being cancelled amid an outbreak of the disease in the north of the country. Since then, the virus has spread across the nation as the death toll has climbed into the hundreds, and the quarantine was extended to encompass some 16 million people in the north of the country, all forced to stay inside their homes or hometowns. And, in the last few days, this quarantine has now been implemented nationwide, as the whole country has gone into a strict lockdown. The quarantine rules are planned to be in effect beyond the end of the month, meaning Italians now face weeks of isolation and confinement. Italy is the first nation to implement quarantining measures at this scale, as its hospitals and medical facilities have been put under tremendous strain. The disease is now moving around Europe from Italy as well, and there has been very little response to stop and control air traffic, meaning unknowingly sick people are still walking away from international airports and spreading the virus freely in new, untapped nations. In the UK there are a few hundred cases, and the US is also struggling to contain the spread of the disease. Since their first handful of deaths last week, the virus has spread to over 30 states, and the stock market has taken a massive nosedive amid the uncertainty and panic. In only his second ever Oval Office address, President Trump outlined plans for a travel ban on incoming European flights and advised all elderly Americans to begin cancelling all non-emergency trips to doctors and public places. But the most arguably alarming outbreak outside of China has come in Iran. Iran now looks to be a major epicenter for the disease. It is currently the third-ranked nation for reported cases, however there are fears that the true extent of the outbreak in the country has been downplayed, not least because of the number of government officials who have tested positive for the virus. Shortly after stating that he didn't believe in quarantining, Iran's deputy health minister was seen on camera sweating during a disturbing press conference. Shortly after, he tested positive for the virus and has since placed himself in isolation. Iran has now banned all Chinese citizens from entering the country, but flights to other parts of the world still continue to arrive and depart from its airports, including to Italy. Furthermore, over 70,000 prisoners have been released from its prisons, with officials failing to comment on whether they would be recalled after the crisis has been dealt with. Several neighbouring countries are now reporting confirmed cases which can be traced back to Iran, prompting fears that its citizens who have fled the country amid news of the outbreak could have carried the virus all around the world, and this is likely just the tip of a ship-sinking iceberg. While COVID-19 is less deadly than Sars, it has spread far further, and its economic impacts have been much more severe. The virus has now spread to over 100 countries worldwide with varying degrees of severity, and it seems the number of border closures, travel bans and quarantines are only going to go up. The overall effect on the global economy has already been worse than in previous outbreaks. Container shipping from Asia to Northern Europe is down by half, and demand for medical resources is spiralling as the pressure on supply chains is mounting to critical levels. The virus is now on every continent except Antarctica, and the death toll has exceeded 4,000 people. We are facing an incredibly dangerous situation as a global community, and world governments are finally laying out concrete action plans amid fears that the worst is yet to come. When you hear conflicting reports about COVID-19's infection rates versus mortality rates, it's difficult to know what to think and whether or not to be worried. But just because COVID-19 won't cause the actual apocalypse, make no mistake, this outbreak is extremely serious. While the symptoms are milder than previous pandemics, for the time being at least, we have no way of stopping it. About 6% of sufferers worldwide have died on average, and this could get worse depending on the scale it reaches. It's important to remember that low mortality rates don't necessarily mean a lower threat. 2% of China's population alone equates to just under 30 million people, and even one death is too many if it is preventable. While the coronavirus probably won't reach the unforgiving scale of Spanish flu, that outbreak should serve as a chilling reminder that it is naive to dismiss a new virus's severity just because of a low death rate. And there is another big problem. People who have recovered from the virus appear to be contracting it again. A few weeks ago, the BBC reported that in China, around 14% of patients who recovered were testing positive again. We assumed that those who recovered from the virus would have some sort of immunity, albeit temporary, but we weren't sure for how long. But if this immunity only lasts for a matter of weeks, then our only way out of this is to develop a vaccine. As such, scientists around the world are collaborating on an enormous scale to find a solution. The good news is that scientists in Wuhan shared COVID-19's genetic sequences quickly, and we also have the genetic code of Sars. Because we know these codes, we now have a blueprint to recreate the virus, and one hope is that synthetic coronaviruses could be inserted into viruses which are harmless to humans, and then if we vaccinate people with this hybrid of the two, the patient will develop some sort of resistance or immunity to COVID-19 without experiencing any of its symptoms. Another method of next-generation vaccine production involves inserting customized genetic material into the body to induce the production of the proteins required to fight off the infection. Because manufacturing proteins for vaccinations is the most time-consuming and expensive part of the process, this new approach could bring the lead time in vaccination research and development down from many years to a matter of months. And these techniques seem to be working, as scientists at the Texas-based genetic engineering company Graphex claim that they have now completed work on a vaccine for the disease, which is now ready to be tested. But testing is a lengthy and complicated process, and the reality is that treatments will probably not be available until partway through next year at the earliest. Animal testing, if successful, could lead to human trials, but human trials themselves will require months to ensure the vaccine is safe for distribution and use. And even if all of this comes off without a hitch, the production requirements to distribute this vaccine at the scale and speed necessary to safeguard the world are considerable, and so for the time being, prevention and containment remains the only means for governments to fight the outbreak. Even if this coronavirus doesn't have lasting implications for humanity, the handling of the outbreak is a cause for concern. With millions of unknown viruses just waiting to jump into humans at any given moment, our delayed response and ineffective early measures are a bad omen of things to come. If the virus that had crossed over in Wuhan been more reminiscent of, say, Ebola, which has a much higher death rate, then the world would be in a much more desperate state than it is now. We are simply unprepared for this sort of crisis. Eventually, disease will probably get us. It's unlikely to be this one, but illness has always been the unrelenting Grim Reaper which has claimed well over half of all humans that have ever lived. And with the rise of superbugs, the fight against disease is only going to get harder. Ultimately, we will beat coronavirus when we finish work on the vaccine, and will stop it before it threatens humanity. But it is hoped that the summer months and the end of seasonal flu will make COVID-19 much less transmissive and more manageable. But that's not going to be much consolation for the people who have already lost fathers, mothers, elderly relatives and other loved ones to the disease. What might be more reassuring is a completely rethought out global plan for tackling emerging viruses. New disease reporting channels, gene sharing sequences, extra funding in containment and treatment. The list of areas of improvement goes on. China now seems to have brought its problem under control, but the fate of the rest of the world is touch and go at best. For nations like Iran and Italy especially, it seems the problem will get worse before it gets better. But with that said, it is easy to protect yourself and those around you. Uncontrollable airborne transmission won't be a problem like it was with Sars, and the world is finally starting to wake up to the need for better hygiene. If nothing else, just know that this is not simply another common cold. Intensive care units in developed nations are not pushed to breaking points by seasonal influenza. And even though more people die from the flu, that's because far more people catch it. If we relax our attitudes because of its similarities to flu and allow it to reach that scale, then tens of thousands of people are going to die. So, overall, should you be worried? Well, we should all be worried when people are dying and governments and NGOs are failing to respond, but the situation isn't unresolvable, and washing your hands, staying hygienic and touching your mouth less are 3 surefire ways you can protect yourself and others from the illness. There's one thing that COVID-19 has in common with all viruses, and that is that if we can stop it spreading, it will have nowhere to go.